So what are these tasks? The first of the four, I said, is dukkha, or suffering, which kind of just means life in its widest sense, including all its joys and its sorrows, birth, sickness, aging and death. He says, dukkha parinya, dukkha is to be fully known, which I would render perhaps as dukkha is to be embraced. Parinya means totally or fully understood. I don't think that means in a cognitive way, having some perfect amount of information about dukkha, but a knowing that comes from our heart, from our body, through our relationships with others, and being able to fully embrace that, to be able to say yes, unconditionally, to that primary experience of life. Now the second of the four is called samudaya, the arising, literally. When it gets converted into a metaphysical doctrine, it's understood as the origin of dukkha. But the word doesn't actually mean origin. It simply means the arising, the uprising. And quite explicitly, the Buddha defines that as craving or grasping, which includes fear and greed and hatred. This is what rises up instinctively, habitually, compulsively, neurotically, in response to life. These feelings, no doubt, go deeply back into the history of our own evolution. They are reinforced by our culture, perhaps, maybe even in some cases by our religion. And they're certainly reinforced by capitalist consumerism. The advertising industry probably has the best understanding of how this works. So what does the Buddha say about the task involved with what arises up like this? He says what arises is to be let go of. To be let go of. In other words, when we experience in our life this immediate upsurge of attachment, fear, hatred, egoism, denigration of others or whatever, we don't sort of try to suppress it in order to be good Buddhists, but rather we fully recognize that this is what's happening, but we don't buy into its story. We allow it to arise, but then to follow its own nature, which is to pass away. So again, coming back to the meditation we did at the very beginning, we tried to cultivate an open, sensitive space in which we become more and more alert to the first stirrings of reactivity, of grasping, craving, and rather than get swept away by them, which is generally what happens, we allow them to simply appear to us. We say, yes, this is what's going on, and we don't get caught up in them. And if we leave these things alone, they will just wear themselves out. It might take a long time. After all, they're not just going to vanish for once and then not recur. We'll probably be with this way of behaviour until we die. But we reinforce it by believing in it and by identifying with it. To say, yes, I'm angry. I hate that person. I'm going to make sure that I get this thing that I so desperately want. We identify with it. We make it our own. We make it mine. In this kind of awareness that comes out of embracing dukkha, we simply allow it to arise and pass away. Sounds like a nice idea. In practice, it is actually very difficult because we're not pushing it away. As soon as we get into an aversive relationship with aversion, or with attachment, we actually reinforce it. So in a way it's about saying yes and then saying no, I'm not going to go there. And as we cultivate this, it brings us to the next element of the four, which is called the stopping or the ceasing, nirodha in Sanskrit. And what is it that stops? It is this reactivity that stops. As it begins to fall away, as we let go of it, as we don't buy into it, we open ourselves to the possibility of an experience in which we find ourselves free from the imperatives of those patterns. And that's called nirvana. Nirvana is not some Buddhist heaven. It's not some state that one will only achieve after one's death or after decades of meditation in a cave in the Himalayas. But nirvana is open as a possibility to each of us in any moment. It's that experience in which those habitual impulses and habits have died away. I don't think it is something alien to most people. We know moments of this deep inner peace. It might have been through meditation, it might be through communion with nature, it might be in prayer, it might be when we're in love. Moments at which we're no longer driven by this compulsive urge to get and to get rid of. It's an openness, a spaciousness, and the task that's connected to this experience is called see it with your own eyes, sachikatha, which I would translate as simply experience this for yourself. In other words, when these moments occur, to consciously affirm their value, to seek more and more to live one's life from that space, from that open awareness that is not driven by compulsion or habit. But interestingly, this is not what the Buddha considers to be the goal of the practice. We haven't got to the fourth element of the four, which is the path. And usually this is understood as the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path, which entails the way we see ourselves in the world, the way we think about ourselves in the world, the way we make intentions, decisions, choices, how that leads to what we say and how we act and how we work and how we apply ourselves, how we pay attention, how we focus our awareness. These 8 elements of the path. And the task that the Buddha gives for this path is to bring it into being. Literally, bhavana. To bring it into being. To create it. To cultivate it. So the path is not something that's conveniently just laid out before us and we just have to take a stroll along it. But the path is something we are constantly challenged to bring into being. It's a practice. Now a path, of course, if we think of the metaphor, and it's a wonderful metaphor, and one that we find probably in all traditions. It must be one of the great unifying metaphors of religion. It's obviously there in Buddhism. Taoism is literally pathism. Tao just means path or way or street. We find in Christianity, we have the famous statement of Jesus declaring himself to be the way, the truth and the life, the way. And according to the Acts of the Apostles, I believe, the early followers of Christ called themselves the followers of the way. You find it in Islam as well, following the straight path of akhlaq. But what is a path? We all think we know, because it's such a common term. Yet if we reflect on its metaphorical associations, then a path boils down in some ways to being an empty, unimpeded space. When you think of a path on a hillside, you often think of it as a brown or a black line imposed on a field of green. But when you go and look at it more closely, you see that the path is where the green has been removed. The grasses or the thorns, bushes or the trees or the rocks have been cleared away. A path is an absence. A path is quite literally an emptiness. And the value of an emptiness, the value of a path, is that it allows us to move, to proceed without impediment. We're free to get into our rhythm and pace. We're not obstructed or blocked by things that are in the way. In the way. So when we look at the Buddha's account of his awakening, it has to do not with gaining some privileged insight into the nature of truth or into the nature of the absolute or the unconditioned. But in his own words, at the culmination of his very first talk, he declares that his awakening has to do with having embraced dukkha, having let go of the grasping that arises, having stopped grasping, and having created and cultivated a way of life. And this, I believe, is describing a process. It's describing a sequence of tasks, each one of which is the precondition for the next. The more that we embrace life in its totality, in all of its tragedy and joy, the more that the absurdity of grasping and clinging and craving falls away. And the more that those habits die down within us, the more we experience moments of openness, of spaciousness, of freedom, that allow us to create and cultivate a path, a way of life that is not determined or conditioned by greed or by hatred or by fear or by egoism or by jealousy, but one that is freed from such imperatives, and we may say that it allows us to live from the joy, the love, the wisdom that opens up in such a space. Now, this sequence can be conveniently summarized in the acronym ELSA. Buddhism is very big on lists and acronyms, so here's a post-Buddhist acronym. ELSA: embrace, let go, stop, and act. Embrace, let go, stop, act. Here we have 4 tasks rather than 4 truths. Here we have a reworking of the operating code of Buddhism from a metaphysical belief system into a vision of a set of tasks to perform in life here and now. And this, to conclude, is what seems to me a model for being completely human. Remember that the Eightfold Path entails the totality of our life. I feel it's a problem very often that Buddhism is presented as primarily the practice of meditation. Of course, meditation is an integral part of Buddhist practice, but it's reductive to think that Buddhism is really about being good at some form of spiritual technique or meditation. We need to integrate the meditation into the way we see the world, think about it, make choices, speak, act, work, and so on. And there we have, I think, a vision of a practice that embraces the totality of our humanity. And I mean the word practice very literally. If you ask Buddhists generally, what's your practice? The typical response is to name a particular spiritual exercise. I practice Zen, I practice Vipassana, I practice mindfulness, I practice Kala Chakra Tantra, or whatever it might be. This, I think, is reducing the path to one element of it. That if we take the path, the Eightfold Path, seriously, every element of it is just as much a practice as any other. The way we communicate, the way we work, these are practices, tasks to perform within the broader paradigm of ELSA. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.